Please turn in it to Luke chapter 22. This is where we're going to spend our time today. Exodus in the Old Testament tells us the history and the reasons for what is called in the Old Testament the covenant, wherein God made a covenant between himself and the Jews. The covenant that God made had some predications. That is, if it was going to operate, it was predicated upon both parties keeping the covenant. God holds up his end, we hold up ours. Well, we didn't hold up ours. And so the old covenant in that sense failed, but it didn't fail in what it was intended to do, which was to teach us, to bring us into the realm of the new covenant. And here we are living in the new covenant, and still we struggle to keep up our end of it. So let's look at this text today and see what it would show us regarding this covenant that God has given to us and what that covenant actually means in terms of our lives. And it's Luke chapter 22. I'll begin reading in verse 21. Jesus says, "Look, the hand of the one who betrays me is on the table. For the Son of Man is going to go just as it has been determined, but woe to the man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed." So the disciples begin to question one another as to which one of them it could possibly be who would do this. A dispute started among the disciples as well as to which one of them was to be regarded as the greatest in Jesus' kingdom. So Jesus said to them, "Look, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over their subjects, and those in authority lord over them, and they are called benefactors, but not with you. Instead, the one who is the greatest among you must become as the youngest. The leader must be like the one who serves. Who's greater, the one who's seated at the table or the one who serves? Is not the one who is seated at the table the greater? But I am among you as one who serves. You are the ones who have remained with me in my trials. Thus I grant to you a kingdom, just as my Father granted to me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones and judge the 12 tribes of Israel." Now, there's a lot in this text, and I'm not going to be able to focus on every point within it in the time we have. But I do want to look at some of the features of it that I think are really important for you and me. One of them is what the argument here is. The disciples are arguing about something that's completely trivial. They don't have any idea where Jesus, what's going to happen to him. They don't know. And so they're having this argument about who is the greatest. But you know, the argument shows me something here that is very tender. It shows me that these disciples have a tremendous comfort level with Jesus. I mean, can you imagine being in front of your boss and having an argument with your coworkers about who's the greatest coworker? I mean, it's so petty. And it's laughable, right? It's laughable. But they are so comfortable in Jesus's care and in his affection for them. It's just like family members. Family members argue like this, right? Kids get who's going to get to sit in the front seat of the car with mom and dad. Who's going to be the first to get on the swings? Who gets the cherry popsicle that everybody wants? Children have these kinds of conversations and arguments because they have a comfort level with their parents. These disciples have such a comfort level with Jesus. They so accept his love for them that they would argue in his presence about something as trivial as who's going to be the boss in the kingdom, who's going to get to sit on Jesus' right and left when he comes into his kingdom. And they're stuck in the idea that this kingdom is an earthly kingdom. That's how they see it. That's why they're asking these questions. When your kingdom starts, Jesus, where do we fit in? What's going to be our spot? Am I going to be the Secretary of State like Ahithophel was for David? I would like that. They just don't get it. Just like David had court officers, they all think they're going to be some kind of court officers. They don't understand it. And they want to make sure that their spot is secure. That's all they're doing here. And this counterintuitive thing that Jesus says about the Gentile rulers just had to be like, what are you talking about, Jesus? I mean, we understand that. But then Jesus goes on to explain it. the disciples are confused by it. I guarantee you they didn't have any idea what he was talking about here at all, because they don't understand what the kingdom is. And from a human standpoint, it's backwards. It's completely backwards. If I want to get ahead in this world, then I want to stand out in this world. That's the way it works. I have a friend who works in IT, that's in intelligence technology, information technology. He's way up in this company. It's a very important job. But about 6 or 7 years ago, I was in a phone call with him, and he was talking about his job and the fact that he had worked. It's a job where they assign projects to teams of people. And he was in one of these teams. And the manager of his team was stealing his ideas and then going to the manager above him and saying, look at what I thought up to solve this problem. And my friend was just totally frustrated. He said, what's going to happen to me? They're not going to ever know that it's me I'm thinking these things up. The boss above me will never know that. I'm never going to get ahead. How am I going to stand out? And I said to him, I said, you need to just knuckle down and make yourself so good at what you do that somebody eventually is going to see that you're the one who's so valuable. You're the one who's coming up with these ideas. They will see that, but don't go in there and blow your horn or make a stink. It's not going to work. Like these disciples are making a stink. Who's going to be the boss, Jesus, when you come into your kingdom? Well, it turns out that now my friend is way up he's one of the managers now, because he did exactly that. He just got down and did his job, the little things that he was assigned to do, and he did them very, very, very well, and God rewarded it. There's something to this that's very potent for you and to me. I have another friend right now. If this friend of mine, I won't say whether it's a man or a woman, so that I have the whole population of the earth. Nobody knows whether 50% of it's been taken away, that you could narrow this down. This friend of mine, if you or I come into a room where this friend of mine is seated and we don't recognize this person, they are really upset. Really upset that you or I didn't recognize them and say, how's it going today, so-and-so? They're upset about it. In this world, the stakes of not being noticed become higher and higher as we become adults. I mean, I used to think this way when I was working in heavy construction. You got 230 employees out there. How am I going to stand out? I want to be seen by my foreman or my superintendent to be really good at what I'm doing, because that way I get paid more money. The income comes along with the recognition. So I'm looking for that. This is where, for you and for me, trusting God becomes a very supernatural thing to do. Anybody can understand. I mean, we're in here today, we're believers, and we know that we're told to stand firm in the gospel. We understand that. But standing firm doesn't make us stand out in any way. This is where it becomes supernatural and so vitally important for you and for me. In God's kingdom, being noticed in the world is not important. It's just not important. There are people who will go through their whole lives serving God very faithfully, and they will never, ever be noticed by anybody doing so. I think about somebody like a Teresa of Calcutta. And of course, we know who she is. So she's got that element of recognition. But 99.9% of all of Teresa's life in serving the Dalit, that is the untouchables in India, in the way that she did, nobody saw that. Nobody saw it. She went through that whole life serving those people, and all the people that worked with her serving those people, and nobody cared. 7 billion people on the planet, you probably couldn't find 100,000 of them who really know anything about what she's doing. There's a statistical zero. And yet, she went through all of her life doing that faithful work. So we come to a place where the supernatural component is, what does it matter that we're here? What does it matter that we're faithful? What does it matter that we live? What does it matter that we do the things that God says matter in these small areas of living that really make a difference? Why should we care? Why should we live any particular way? I was reading about this contractor who had a guy that worked for him. The guy's name was Clyde. And Clyde was his lead carpenter. He'd worked with him for 30 years. And he was the guy that the contractor sent to be in charge of whatever they were building. Well, Clyde got to be 70 years old and decided, I really don't want to do this anymore. I'd like to retire. So he went to the contractor. He said, I'd like to retire this year. And the contractor said, well, I understand. He said, when would you like to retire? Clyde said, in 2 weeks. 70 years old, it's legitimate. You'd expect that. The contractor just begged him. He said, Clyde, we got one more house that I don't have anybody in the crew that can oversee that house in the way that you can. Would you just stay for the last house? Finally, Clyde said, all right, I'll stay for the last house. So they built the house. Clyde stayed. Well, you know how this is. When we're in something and we know it's coming to an end. I remember the last day of the school year when I was growing up. The teachers didn't really bother to give us a bunch of assignments to do that day because it's the last day. What difference does it make? Unless there was a test that day, which there never was, we just sit around. She'd say, look, if you'll just be quiet. That's all she expected. Be quiet and draw or something. And then recess, you come back in and just sit there the rest of the day. We've got to make the day. I don't really care what you're... The teacher was giving up on the whole thing. And so Clyde did that with this house. He just gave up on it. He didn't really pay attention. He didn't worry about it. He didn't apply himself. If somebody do something that was a little out of whack, he'd say, that's okay, nobody will know. And so they finished the house. Well, they had a party for Clyde and his wife. The contractor... And they had it at the house that they had just finished. They said, let's have a big barbecue. We want to celebrate Clyde's work. 30-something years he's worked for us. We're going to have a party. So they did. Contractor owns the house. Why not? We own the property. Why not have the party there? They're all sitting around. Everybody's eating. They got their red plastic cups, with whatever they're drinking, tea or whatever, and they're just having a great time. And then the contractor stands up and says, I want everybody to know that today's the day when Clyde's going to retire. And so and he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out a set of keys and he says, Clyde, for all those years of service that you gave to me, the keys to this house are yours and your wife to spend the rest of your days. The house is fully paid for. It's yours. Well, Clyde knew that the house wasn't built up to the standards of work that he'd done his whole life. You and I are building all the time. We're building something wherein family members, people in the marketplace who see us, we're building a life that says God is real and it matters how we live in front of Him. It matters what we do. It matters how we do it. And the smallest things are proclaiming messages about us and about whether or not we believe that stuff is really real. I think about it this way for myself. Sermonizing is important, I suppose, but it's not nearly as important as how I treat people outside. My wife, you all, anybody. How I'm giving of myself toward other people to serve them in the smallest of ways, not the big ways. I remember one time in Pennsylvania, and I'll never ever forget this. This is 30 years ago. I was preaching. I was preaching on Joshua, chapter 2. I remember the sermon. I remember what it was about. I thought this is if you've never done this in front of a crowd of any kind, of course you can't really call this a crowd, but if you've never spoken in front of people in this way, when you do it, sometimes it's like it's on. It's really going well. And you feel like God is really doing something through you that day, and it's intoxicating. I can't explain it any other way. Well, this was one of those days. I had a map, and I was showing how Joshua was coming in from the east into the promised land and taking Ai and coming across and the route that they took, and I explained all that, and I was preaching this sermon about Joshua, and I just thought, man, this is happening. The words are flowing. It's going really well. Well, I got done, and people are milling around. It's a church of about 250 people, and people were milling around, And this guy that I didn't recognize came up and tears just streaming down his face. Now I thought to myself, wow, God really used Rip today. I felt like it was on. And here's this weeping 35-year-old man, and he comes up to me and he just says, I just wanted to tell you, I'm waiting. I got to confess, I was waiting for him to say how great the sermon was. And he says, I am so glad you read that passage of Scripture today. That's all that meant anything to him. I read something from the Bible out loud. Wasn't me. See, Jesus' kingdom is not like the kingdom of the world. We're doing things that to us don't seem like anything. But they matter. It all matters. Think about somebody like Jeremiah. All right, Jeremiah, there he is. Babylonian captivity's coming. Nebuchadnezzar's coming. The Jews won't listen to him. He tells them he's coming. You get ready. They listen to the other prophets who tell the Jews 2 years and it'll all be over. Don't worry about it. Well, the Babylonians come. They take them all away. They destroy the temple. Jeremiah is still prophesying. The other prophets are saying, oh, it's just going to be a short time. God's going to sweep these Babylonians away. And Jeremiah is saying, no. It's going to be a long time. You need to go out there and plant your gardens. Give your children in marriage. Get married. Have children. Take care of your flocks. We're going to be here a long time. And pray for the welfare of this country. Well, they throw Jeremiah in a hole. That's his reward for his preaching. He's telling them the truth, and he gets thrown in a hole. So the only recognition he got was negative recognition. What does this text, Jesus, in this moment with his disciples, mean for you and me? All right, here we are in this room today. How many of you in this room can tell me who your great-great-grandparents were? Can anybody really say who your great-great-grandparents, your grandparents' grandparents were? Do you know anything about them? Do you know what they were like? Do you know what kind of food they like to eat? Do you know what colors they like? Do you know anything? Okay, what did their life matter to us now? What does Einstein's life matter in 100 years when all the science has been changed? See, the question is, for me, who are we trying to be famous with? That's what we're really doing. When these disciples asked Jesus this, they were saying, I want to be famous in this world. And since you're the king, I want to be famous by being wherever you'll place me. I want that fame. But think about it. 150 years from now, nobody's going to remember Rip Snow. Who was Rip Snow? Who was Ed Waldron? Who was Brad Henderson? Who were any of us in 150 years? It won't matter. Who are we trying to be famous with? What is the meaning for the things that we do? There's only one question that matters in this, and C.S. Lewis asks it. He says, am I famous with God? Am I famous with God? See, that answer to that question changes everything. The slightest good thing we do matters because it matters to God. Am I famous with God? Paul closes his letter to the church at Corinth by saying, never tire of doing good, for any service to the Lord is not done in vain. I'll tell you, when we ask the question about what our life is and what it matters that we were here, that's the answer to the question. Are we famous with God? I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything you've got a question about, you want to pray with